I love this picture. Um, it reminds me of my son when he was young. And I think a lot of little boys when they're young, they go out and they pick up the dirt and they watch it fall and it falls to the ground and it scatters in the wind. And yet, I think sometimes relationships which seem like they're all too permanent can all of a sudden become like that shifting sand or like that dirt that's falling to the ground where it just gets picked up by the wind and it's gone. And one of the things I've done in the midst of my time as a pastor, and I did it even before that, but one of the things I've done a lot of in my time as a pastor is sit with people when somebody has done something or said something that just, you wish you had that thought bubble that you could kind of pull back in your mouth and make the words unsaid, or you wish you could take an eraser of the past and make the deed undone. But it doesn't work that way. And in particular, as I was thinking about this, and maybe it's because I've been reading the story of Alexander Hamilton. It's a long book, but it's all about the point where he ends up in the affair with Maria Reynolds, and again, and I've seen. Again, I've talked with people and over the last 15 years, a lot of different places in the midst of marriages and relationships and everything. And I've seen where all of a sudden trust somehow gets broken. And I'm a firm believer that the currency you have in any relationship is trust. That if you don't have trust, the relationship doesn't have much to go on. But if you have trust, that there is that potential for a lot of different things. But there are things that happen where, trust is something you build up over time, little by little by little. I love the image that Brene Brown, a social worker, uses of, trust being like a marble jar where you fill it up by the little acts that you do day after day. But there are certain things you do that all of a sudden take that jar and push it off the table and it ends up on the floor and it's empty. And I've had enough experiences sitting in a room with people that I will never say this out loud in the midst of counseling a person, but I can normally tell pretty quick if something has a chance of working or not. And one of the ways one of the things I look for is if the person who has knocked the marbles off the table is willing to admit that they've done anything wrong. Are they willing to say, I was wrong. I broke this. I hurt this. I have caused pain to you, to me, to others. And the reason this comes up as I was thinking about this week is the psalm for today, which is Psalm 51. Psalm 51 is a psalm that we read every single Ash Wednesday. But we never read the little narrative that says what the psalm is about. So Psalm 51 is the little postscript for Psalm 51 says, a psalm of David. When Nathan confronted David after he'd gone into Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. So we have the setting of this psalm where David, all of a sudden, and that doesn't show up real well on the screen. So it's supposed to be Nathan confronting David. David has been a person after God's own heart. And after a long time in his life, he's ascended to that position that God had promised him. He's now the king of Israel. He has everything that he's supposed to want, and yet there is this time in the midst of his life where, it's that time where kings went out to war, and that was what there was always this conflict going back and forth throughout David's time as being king. He never really had a time of peace. But usually he had led the people out, led the armies out into the wars. But this year, for whatever reason, he decided to stay home. And so the armies are out fighting, and he's home, and he's up on top of his palace, and he sees a beautiful woman, and he decides, I must have her. And so he has her brought into the palace, and then he sends her back home. And then not too long later, he receives notice, I'm pregnant. And so what David does is he tries to cover it up. He tries to bring Uriah home. He brings Uriah, her husband, who's not an Israelite, he's a Hittite. He brings him home from the front, entertains him at the palace, tries to get him drunk, tries to send him home for his wife, but this non-Israelite shows David what it means to be faithful. It says, my men are out in the field. I'm not going to go home and sleep with my wife while my men are enduring hardship. So he goes and camps out at the opening of the gate of the palace. He doesn't go home. David tries once again to get him to do this. And when he won't do this, there's a point where you just stop. You stop digging. But David doesn't. And so he sends Uriah back with his own death warrant in his hand, with the orders that he's going to give to the general of Israel, and for whatever reason the name's slipping my mind. He's going to give the orders in his hand of, when you go and when you engage in conflict against this city that you're sieging, put Uriah up on the front lines, where it's going to be fighting is going to be the heaviest. And then as soon as you get engaged, have everybody else pull back and leave him out there on his own. And Uriah dies. And the message comes back to David that we've suffered this great defeat, but Uriah is dead. And so David brings Bathsheba into his house, and it seems like everything is well, until Nathan comes to him. And Nathan comes to David and tells David a story. So there was a man, a rich man, who had a flock full of sheep. And in this flock, he had more than he could ever use. But there was a poor man who lived next to him who only had one. And he brought this sheep into his house, and he loved it like a daughter. And he took care of it. But when the rich man had a stranger come by his house, instead of taking one of his own sheep, he went and killed the neighbor's sheep. Fed it to the passerby. And David is furious by this, and he says, "Who is this man?" And that's when Nathan turns to him and says, "David, you are that man." And so Psalm 51 is attributed to David in this time when he's reflecting with this, where he has become, he's fallen so far from the person who he was supposed to be. Here's everything that God has given him, and he's broken trust with God in this relationship. He's broken trust with his people in this relationship. He's broken trust with Uriah in this relationship. There's no restoring that anymore. And yet there is this desire for things to be like they were. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Don't cast me away from your presence. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and renew in me a right and clean spirit. And there are lots of ways that God could have responded to David. God could have said to David, "You are an adulterer, you are a murderer, and that is all you will ever be. That is the limit of your identity." And so now, all you will ever be is selfish and hopeless and careless and bad and no good and worthless and ugly and stupid. And you can go on and on down the list of all the ways in which, I don't know about anybody else, I'm horrible to myself sometimes when I make a mistake. And I've certainly had other people be horrible to me at times when I've made mistakes. And I think it's real easy to be ugly to other people when they make mistakes. To say, here's everything that you've done wrong. Or when you're having a bad day and all of a sudden somebody does something little and you take out all your aggression on them, because at least for that moment it feels good. God could have done that to David. God doesn't. God could have said, I have no use for you anymore. I'm going to lock you away and throw away the key. I think that in a graceless society that we live in, that we have too many times where we say, you know what? This person's irredeemable. There's nothing left of them. Take them away, lock them up, and we never want to see them again. But if you remember Sunday, for those who were here on Sunday, we heard in the 34th chapter of Exodus, where after the people have betrayed God with the golden calf, and Moses is interceded between God and the people, and God finally reaches this place where God says, I am who I am. I am who I am. I am who I am. I am a God who is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Forgiving. I don't forget the sins, but I do forgive. And the thing that, as I've been thinking about this and going back to that image of the marble jar, I like this particular image, and there's a reason for that. See, when you're working on reestablishing that relationship, it doesn't come all at once. It's a million little acts, one after another, after another, after another. You want to know what I love about this particular picture? The jar's not closed. That there's the potential to rebuild that relationship. There's the potential for trust to be rebuilt. There's potential for that back and forth to happen. And I really think that's part of what Lent is all about. Lent is an opportunity to focus in on some of those little things that we do to pay attention to our relationship with God. There are lots of things that people do in the midst of this time, in the midst of this 40 days. And I think 40 days is a good amount of time to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to try and develop a habit. I'm going to try and develop something that takes root, that takes hold of something. Whether it's committing to, you know what, I'm going to try and commit to trying to take some time every day in prayer. Or I'm going to give up something that I know is not healthy for me. Or I'm going to do something that tries to make something better for somebody else. Or I'm going to try and do something that helps me take care of myself so that I can understand better how to take care of other people. Or I'm going to pay attention to certain things. There's lots of ways in which we can come into Lent, in which we come in our acts of worship, and our acts of confession, and our acts of prayer, and our acts of giving thanks. And I think part of it is to help us realize, all the little things that God does for us day after day, to say, I am trustworthy. I am present. I'm here for you in the midst of this relationship. There may be things that we can't undo. And I'm not going to say that there aren't consequences to the things that we do. When David committed this act with Bathsheba, there were consequences. There were consequences in David's family. There were consequences in his reign. There were consequences for all of the people of Israel in many respects. But what Psalm 51 asks for is a chance. Is a chance to begin that process of making things maybe not right, but little by little, to getting that relationship back. And so as we enter this season, as we enter this journey, as we do those things that may be little, or they may seem like they're huge, I hope that you know that this is a season that we enter into in that sense that forgiveness and grace are offered. That we serve a God who, even when we were enemies, loved us anyway. We serve a God who is who God will be. A God of abundant love, of compassion, slow to anger, much quicker to forgive. And may that love, forgiveness, and grace not only come to us, but also come from us to others in the midst of this world. So, brothers and sisters, as we begin this journey, as we remember that while we may be dust, and to dust we shall return, and there may be things that we cannot control, one thing does hold us fast. That love of God that nothing can separate us from. That forgiveness of God that God offers freely this night. That chance to work on that connection that we have between ourselves and our neighbors and ourselves and God. Come. Come, my precious brothers and sisters. Come on this journey as we pick up our cross and follow behind.